What's up, I'm Troubleshoot. For the longest time I've wanted a NAS and finally ASUSTOR have offered to send me one. So in this video I'll unbox it, show you what's inside, show you how to quickly set up and get going in no time. A quick crash course. So ASUSTOR sent over this bad boy with 4 hard drive slots and 4 M.2 slots on the inside, upgradable to 16 gigs of RAM with a relatively powerful quad-core CPU and integrated GPU, meaning running Plex and things like that off of this is going to be no stress. You'll see more videos like that in the future, a lot of which will be on my Linux channel linked down below. Inside of this box came a brown box with a bunch of cables and of course the ASUSTOR NAS itself. The cable box of course contains your favorite 3-pin IEC kettle cord plug and of course a 90-watt adapter to get the most out of the system, though most of the time you won't go above 35 watts in operation, 17 in hibernation, and about 1 in sleep. Obviously, besides this, we've also got a couple of screws for which we've got the perfect number, don't lose any, and of course your favorite even more Ethernet cords to add to your collection. And of course, a giant roadmap manual, which doesn't really have anything written on it, it's more just pictures and hieroglyphics. Inside of the plastic, we've obviously got the 4-bay NAS, which put together pretty solidly on the back as an HDMI output, its second USB 3.2 Gen 2, 10 gigabit, and 2 2.5 gig Ethernet ports, which you can later upgrade to 10 gig using the internal slot there. That used to be proprietary and locked away for only the 4 internal M.2 slots, but you can pull those out and replace it with a 10 gig card. Heading over to the front, simply just pressing the latches, pulling out these drive trays, super easy, exactly what you'd expect. Putting them in is just as simple as lining them up and clicking them into place. Adding hard drives, just slot it in, make sure the connector's on the right side, and apply all 4 of the screws, as you would usually. There isn't a toolless installation for this, which would be nice to see, but this works fine anyways. Clicking it into place, we've now got everything set up, and of course, time for a peel. Fantastic. Unraveling the cables, sticking them together, and plugging this in. Powering it on, we've got the startup state, which lasts for a couple of minutes while it thinks about life, until eventually we're able to initialize it. Simply hitting yes and choosing to erase your data will set up the NAS using whatever drives you've got inserted. For me though, I'd preferably install apps and things like that to an NVMe drive, so for that reason, I'll be pulling out everything and sticking in those first. In total, I've got 2 4TB drives which I'll be sticking in immediately, as well as an 8 gig stick of DDR4 SODIMM RAM to expand the existing 4 up to 12, not quite a maximum of 16, but you'll see why in just a moment. Then I've also got 2 Samsung 960 EVOs, a little bit old, one of them 500 and the other one 250 gig, which I'll probably use for a cache. For now though, I'll start with the 500 gig and the extra RAM stick, unscrewing with the 3 screws on the back, popping off the cover, and looking inside. You'll immediately see the M.2 slots, which are toolless installations. Simply just figure out which order you need to put these things in. Usually it's just following 1, 2, 3, 4, the same way as it's written on the actual plastic, and of course, pressing it into place, pulling the tab back, the toolless installation is complete. Then on the left side, we've got this RAM slot over here, which we can just pop in our SODIMM, click into place, and just like that, we've now upgraded the thing. If you, of course, want to stick in another 8 gig stick, you're unfortunately going to have to take everything apart to get to the internal RAM slot hidden away there. Finally, putting it all back together and booting it on, it tells me no disk is found. Well, that's pretty unfortunate. Basically, NASs will have a compatibility list where it says which drives it can and can't work with. You may have better luck with unsupported drives, but for me at least, these drives will only work once I actually set up the system and update the firmware from within. To do so, I'll need to initialize using just plain old hard disks. Then we can later select the M.2 drive as our system drive, where apps and things like that will be installed for faster operation. For now then, I've initialized to the hard drives, and of course, once we boot it up, we got a plethora of options to choose from, but the main one we're interested in is the IP address, which we can punch in and visit from our system for better control. Let's flick over. Once your NAS is up and running, I'll simply head across to the NAS's address, :8000 in a browser, and log in using the default username and password of admin, just admin, and once you've done so, you'll see that there's an update available. This ADM is essentially the firmware on the system, so we'll let it update, which will take a bit of time, but once it's done, this should at least improve compatibility with different drives, and you'll see that once this is done, my SSDs, while previously not detected, are working fine, even though they're not on the supported list. This, of course, could be different for you. Just make sure that the drives that you're getting, if you're getting new drives, actually work with your NAS and are compatible. Once the NAS has restarted, It gives me a few different tips on how to improve security on the device, but we'll go through that in just a moment. And we can change the default HTTP and S port for connecting to our NAS's controller. I'd recommend changing these to anything that you're not going to be using in projects. If you're planning on running Docker and things like that, usually 8000 is fine, but I changed mine to 6060 and 6061. Doesn't really matter what you change it to. While it's suggested to change it, changing ports doesn't really give you any extra security. A simple Nmap scan can show you every open port on a device. It's really not anything crazy. After hitting OK, it applies and it shows me a quick getting started tutorial. You can follow this if you wish. If you choose to, it'll show you how to set up different user accounts simply by opening the Access Control app, choosing Add, giving ourselves a name, customizing our UID if you need, setting a password and an email, which I'll do here. And I'd recommend you set up a brand new admin account that isn't just admin. You can also set an expiration date if you wish, but I'll leave everything as is and choose Next. Now we can set a role and give privileges to our brand new user, or we can just choose to set them as an admin. And as this is my first admin account created here, I'll choose that and then hit Finish. Once it's done, our new account is now active, and it takes us across to the File Explorer where we can start setting up shares. If you choose to follow through with this part of the guide, it takes you through setting up a brand new share, for which I'll call this, say, data. We can set a description, and you can choose the drive or volume you wish for this share or folder to be located on. Underneath, we can choose to hide this folder from devices on our network, enable or disable the recycle bin, which is on by default. Then we can set read and write permissions, either for everyone, for admin only, or set by users individually, or even groups. You can also deny access for anyone anonymously connecting to your device, which is a very good idea, as anyone on the same local network can see your device, can connect to it, and interact if you were to turn this thing on. Finally, you can choose to enable Windows ACL, which isn't required, but it allows you to change file and folder permissions from Windows in the Network Sharing tab. Hitting Next, we can choose to encrypt this share or enable Worm, which essentially allows writing of new files, but you can't interact with them once they're placed there for a short while. For now, I'll just choose Skip, as we're just doing this as an example. Hitting Next and done, our share is now created. Then, if you'd like to access your NAS from Windows, you can use 2 backslashes followed by the IP address inside of a new run dialog or a file browser to get to it and see all of the network shares. Also, if you choose to set a host name, which by default will be ASUSTOR something, you can use 2 backslashes followed by the name. Later, I set this to NAS, so I can just do 2 backslashes NAS, and I'm in this folder here. Once you're in this network share folder, you can open up Interact with Data as you would usually, and we'll get to mounting these in just a bit. But for now, continuing with the quick tutorial, it'll ask us if you want to access our NAS outside of our local network, which isn't required, but essentially you can sign in with your ASUSTOR account here and connect to it over the internet, I'm pretty sure without port forwarding. Now we're dropped onto the main screen and the quick start tutorials are finished. If we open up the Settings app and head across to the ADM Update tab, here you can check for new updates, and as you can see, version 5 is now available, which I'll update to, which again will restart our device, and it does change some things from the previous versions which you may need to check out if you're updating and you have things relying on older PHP, etc. For me though, it's no issue. I'll click Update and wait for it to finish. This does change icons and things quite a bit, so if you've watched a guide on this particular device before, well, Update 5 is pretty new, so things might look a little bit different. Waiting for it to finish, our device restarts. We can then log in with our brand new user account. It presents us with another tutorial, which I'll be skipping, so let's tackle security. To start off, open up the Access Control app, and we'll be disabling the built-in admin account so that we can only use our new custom admin account. If you need to access root for whatever reason, you can still enable the SSH terminal and use the sudo-i command to get root access as you would usually. So for now, I'll open up the admin settings, change the password, and choose to disable this account. Once we've done so, it's marked as inactive, and we've only got our account here. Keep in mind, you'll need to click your icon in the top right and sign out if you're still signed into the root account before you can disable it. Back to the Settings app, followed by Notification. Here we can set up email, SMS, and push notifications so we can find out what's wrong with our device, if anything, as it's happening, and prepare backups, things like that. It's a good idea to set up at least one of these just in case the worst happens. For email, you can use any SMTP server or even a Google or Microsoft account. I'll be setting up Other here, which is just a usual SMTP server, as I've got my own email server running, so I'll make a new account for it and punch in its details here. Once we've done so, we can send a test email, which looks something like this. Once you've confirmed you're receiving emails, just hit OK. All we need to do now is click Add under Receive, which allows us to receive notification updates from our device. From here, you can apply a template of different warning levels. I would definitely recommend disabling info, otherwise you'll get emails about absolutely everything your device does, which can get annoying very quickly. On the Certificate Manager tab, you can set up custom SSL if you wish, but I won't be using this at all. And on the Region tab, change your time zone to match your actual time zone, just to make sure the clock's right. And for me, I'll be choosing a different date format and clock format, applying our changes. And on the Network tab, here we can do some interesting things. On the Network Interface tab, we can customize a device, which we can also do physically with buttons, but here we can set up a static IP address, which I would definitely recommend, especially if you're going to be port forwarding to this thing. I'll choose that and punch in a number here, such as 192.168.116, which is what this thing was automatically given by my routers, but I would recommend pushing this number much higher, just so that if it disconnects and a new phone connects, it doesn't get given this IP address, leaving your device to choose a new different one. It's super important to set up a static IP if you're going to be port forwarding and things like that. Once this is done, you may need to refresh your browser or punch in a different address if it doesn't change automatically, but it should. After logging in again, heading back to settings, we'll go into the hardware tab, where now we can customize the brightness of lights and things like that. If we have a look at the device sitting behind me, the color's a bit upset because I'm recording this afterwards. You'll find out about that in a bit. Again, subtle foreshadowing. You can see the lights are relatively bright. If I push this all the way down to the lowest end, 0, and apply, you can see the lights literally turn off, except for any warning and error lights like this one right over here. On 1, the status lights come on. 3, this light over here, all the way up to the maximum of 100, where these things are super bright and can easily illuminate a room. For me though, I'll be keeping this at about probably 10, just so it's not super obvious. Then just underneath this, you can customize the light mode to turn them off at nighttime using the night mode or night mode scheduling. And you can choose buzzer options here, which is the beep that the thing made when it's turned on. Power on, off, and restart I'd personally turn off, but you can also turn off warning and error, which I, again, subtle foreshadowing, had to turn off because this thing gets real loud and complainy when a drive is failing, which is obviously very good, but consistent, solid beeping, especially when you know something's wrong and there's nothing you can do about it, well, I turned them off anyways. On the Energy Control tab, you can limit power, but for me, I won't be doing anything like that here. Power, you can enable Wake on LAN or tell it to turn off after some time, set up power scheduling. Again, I won't be playing with that at all, as I want it to run all the time. Fan control, you can change the volume of the fan, but personally, pushing it up to high power, this thing didn't get too noisy. It's just like a medium warm gaming laptop. It's noticeable, but nothing crazy. I'll leave it on auto. Finally, the LCD panel, we can set up custom text here. By default, it's ASUSTOR NAS, but if I change it to troubleshoot, you can see in the background that the word troubleshoot cycles across it. Moving on, we can set up limits for the recycle bin and set up an emptying schedule, which is pretty useful. Schedule automatic thumbnail creation for different media. Easy Connect, which allows us to connect to our device over the internet, assuming you have a subscription. And Manual Connect, where you can set up DDNS, but you can choose from many providers like Cloudflare, Duck DNS, and many more. On the ADM Maintenance tab, again, we can set up automatic updates, which I would recommend doing, factory reset our device, and backup settings for this device, and I'd recommend doing this at least once in a while or after major changes. On the Registration tab, I'll be creating an account here, which is my ASUSTOR account, which then allows me to use DDNS and things like that. Finally, the General tab, here we can customize the sign-in page style and enable media conversion, which I'd recommend leaving on Always Ask. Finally, media mode, which when turned on, allows Intel QSV to work, which I'd definitely recommend enabling if you're going to be using Plex, Jellyfin, or anything like that. You'll find a guide linked down below for that when I eventually get across to it. Saving our changes, the system restarts, and we're finally back. Now that we've set up our options, let's get to setting up our RAID volumes, drives, and things like that. From the homepage, I'll choose Storage Manager, and in here we can see volumes that exist currently, and as you can see, my device is listed as abnormal. One of my hard drives is currently failing, which isn't the best. It does get worse, but for now at least, do keep in mind that we had to install or set the operating system to use our hard drives, as my NVMe SSDs weren't supported at the time of setting this thing up. If you'd like to change whatever your primary drive is, which is used for storing programs you download from the ASUSTOR store and things like that, all you need to do is add your new drive and remove the original drive where things were installed to. It'll take some time, but it'll migrate all of your current settings and things like that to that drive, and you will need to reinstall whatever apps you currently have set up, if any. I'll do that in just a moment, but for now, I'll choose Add We'll then choose where we want this device to come from, which will be either our hard drive array or our M.2 array. We can then set RAID options depending on what configuration we have. If you've only got 2 drives, you'll only see RAID 0 and 1, for which 0 is just running them both stuck together, and RAID 1 is running them both with the same data, giving you better speed for both read and write, and great redundancy as you have 2 drives running the exact same copy of everything. Of course, you'll only have the storage space of 1 drive, so for this reason, instead of choosing any of these options, I'll be adding them as separate drives anyway, like I've been running them previously inside of my computer. So for now, I'll choose M.2 Advanced Setup instead of Quick Setup, which is only RAID options for all of your drives, and now we can choose Single, JBOD, any real RAID configuration. I'll choose Single as I want these drives to be added individually, the 500 gig drive for the NAS and its operating system, and the 250 gig for a read cache, making things much faster to access from the slower hard drives. Then we can choose ext4 or BTRFS, and I would recommend choosing the latter for a much better file system. It's just better in pretty much every way, and it allows you to create snapshots, which is really important. Once you click finish, it'll provision the drive and it should pop up on the screen in a moment. I'll then add my second NVMe, followed by my other hard drive, all with the same settings. And just like that, I've got 4 separate volumes which we can set up shares on and things like that. You can check out your smart info and drive status from the drive tab for each of your different volumes, so you can find out exactly what's wrong, if anything, as they go wrong. Most of the time though, things should hopefully be good and healthy. If you wish, you can also set up ISCI drives and ISCI LUN drives, but for me, I'm just sticking to plain old volumes on my system. So heading back to that tab, we can then open up the Snapshot Center. Here we can manage and add snapshots. Snapshots are basically just copies, or previous versions rather, of your drive, where you can access all of your files as is. If I make a snapshot now, in the future, no matter what I do to the drive, I can return to this state and pull files from it as they were right now when I create it. You can also set up a schedule to create these snapshot points, and the great thing about BTRFS is that this doesn't actually take too much space. However files stay on the drive, and if they're modified, a new copy of that file is made, leaving our original pretty much intact. It only changes what's necessary on top of it, etc. It's really smart that way. So having snapshots is pretty much a win-win. No matter what, you can come here and manage your previous snapshots, and I'd recommend setting up a snapshot schedule for one every night, every week, or something along those lines, just so you have not so much a rolling backup, but previous versions of your files available, which is super useful. Now, if I go ahead and remove the smaller SSD, which I said I'd make a cache later, I'll need to enter a password, and once it's gone, we can now set up an SSD cache. This is pretty cool. Essentially, for one volume, which is either a single drive or a single RAID array, you can set up a read cache, or if you have 2 SSDs, a read and write cache, which will make either operation a lot quicker. I assume you need 2 drives for a write cache just to make sure that everything's saved properly and no data loss occurs. A read cache, on the other hand, keeps a copy on your actual drive or RAID array and your SSD as well, allowing quick access to it, especially if you're accessing the same file over and over. As I am only adding one of these SSDs as a cache, I can only choose read only here. Now, obviously you can't choose which volume or RAID array to attach this to from this creation wizard here, but you do so by selecting it from your volume list before you pull up this window. We can then choose a size here, again, as you're dedicating this SSD to just this one particular task. You can't use it for anything else. So if you use only half of the capacity, you can't mount and use the other half as a normal drive. It's dedicating specifically to being a cache. If you've done otherwise, you'll need to come back, remove it, and set it up again. Clicking OK mounts the SSD cache to that particular RAID volume or drive, and once it's done, accessing files at least more than once should be a lot quicker. And of course, your drive will now show with the label SSD above it, meaning that the cache is properly set up. Choosing that option again, we can now remove the SSD cache, which I'll do as I first set it up, not using the entire capacity. Now, as you know, my drive is currently a bit unhappy, and it only gets worse from here, but we can check out the Dr. ASUSTOR app, which provides a pretty handy place to come and check all of your options from one place, such as, is your system up to date? Is SSH enabled? Are your drives drives happy with hard disk smart? Do you have backups? And do you have snapshots set up? I personally skipped over snapshots for now as one of my drives is actively failing and I'm planning to replace all of them in the future, of course when budget allows. But this is a good app to come to at least once to find out what's set up on your system if you may have skipped over something. Speaking of heading back to the storage manager, volume, here we can manage our drives and also choose to, if it's a hard drive, under file system we can defragment or file scrub, which obviously helps optimize and increase speed on hard drives and checks the integrity of files and repairs automatically if problems are found. This is good to run on a RAID drive, and defragmentation and defragging a hard drive once in a while is a good idea. Under an SSD, we get both of those options. While it says defragment, it should hopefully be running a trim operation and not truly defragmenting, as there's no travel time for a physical head between files and fragments' physical locations on an SSD as there is with a hard drive. Keep in mind of the different volume labels. Here, I'm recording this after, so the drive labels are a little bit different, volume 1, 2, and 3. I don't think you can rename these, which would be a nice touch to add, but you'll need to know which volume is which will really be easy if you've just got one singular RAID array instead of having multiple single disks. So volume 2 is where I want things if I open up the File Explorer to make ourselves a new share for things like a games folder, recorded media, things like that. I want these to go onto a particular drive. If I right-click here and create a shared folder, it opens up the Access Control app on the Shared Folders tab. Here, I can choose Add, and we can make a new folder here like Temp. I'll give it the description of for the video, and we can choose a volume here. Again, you might have one, which makes this easy, but for me, I need to choose volume 2 if I want it on my hard drive with the SSD cache. I'll hit Next, by user, and in here, I can give my current user read and write access, and everything else I'll deny. So now guest and admin or whoever else can't access our files at all. Only we have read and write access, or we can say another user has read-only access. For now though, this is fine. I'll choose Next, skip encryption, everything looks good, finish, bam. We now have our new temp folder here. If we open up a new file browser on Windows and head across to our drive, which is 2 backslashes followed by our IP address, or if you've already set up a host name, it might be 2 backslashes and NAS, for example. Either way, you'll land up in the right place. Here, I can find the temp folder. We can access files as usual, or we can right-click it and choose Map Network Drive. For me, this is in a bit of a weird location, but for you, it should be somewhere on this main screen. So I'll map it, and from here, we can give it a drive letter, like, say, D, reconnect it, sign in, finish, and bam, just like that, we've now got a new drive mounted on our system right here. It's like having a normal drive, it's just listed under network locations as it's somewhere else physically. You can already see I've got a games folder and a recording drive here, so we can use this as usual, and of course it appears under this PC, which is great. In the future, you can always right-click and choose disconnect, bam. So now your system's a bit cleaner. You can also right-click a drive and choose always available offline, which will keep a copy of all of the data in this network location on your local system. Pretty cool. If you want to give access to someone else, of course, you can head back to the Access Control, Shared Folders, and edit the share you just created, where we can then enable Windows ACL if you wish, or under Access Rights, change who has read and write permissions or deny. By default, all users are denied access to this, which is great. So if they want to access a folder, they need to put in the right username and password. Now, obviously, I haven't put in a password just yet. It just happens to work, and that's because I'm using the same username here and the same password as I do on Windows. So I can simply just open it up, and Windows gives it my current username and password, and we just have access to it like that. If I were to say only the admin account can use it and I can't, bam. Now if I try and open up temp, well, we don't have permission. It's sent my default username and password and it wasn't accepted. If I enter the correct user account here, bam, we've now got access to it, although I think it's a bit confused. Either I used the wrong password, or because the account is disabled, I can't log into it. Either way, you get the point of how this thing works. Fantastic. You can obviously, on top of this, manage files directly from this web interface, where we can go into File Explorer, and under whichever share it is, drag and drop files from Windows, mount CIFS folders, create new folders or files, and even upload single folders, files, zips, and more, add a favorite, and more. If I were to upload, say, a zip folder, it sends it up, and we can then right-click it and choose from a couple of options. If I choose to extract a zip, just like that, the operation happens, and we've now got our folder over here that I just uploaded with a bunch of files in it. Great. You can also do the opposite of compressing folders and files. using Shift to select multiple or Control to select multiple, much like you do on Windows. We can choose to compress or compress to a 7-zip, which is fantastic for compression results with different levels. And just like that, we've now zipped a folder on our NAS. Fantastic. That's pretty much the brunt of the work a NAS will be doing, is storing and serving files. If you want to run things on the NAS, for which there's a ton to choose from and pretty much an infinite number of things to choose from, if you choose to install Docker, you can head across to the App Central app, where we can choose from different categories to install specific apps, like ASUSTOR apps such as ASUSTOR Portal, which allows you to plug this thing in using the HDMI and show media on your TV or whatever screen, photo gallery, text editor, things like that, all the way to UPnP media server, antiviruses, document hubs, Nextcloud, and more. If I skip this, on the top apps page, we've got a ton of different apps, including the Iron Wolf Health Management, which, if you're using an Iron Wolf drive, I would recommend installing, as it'll give you some info more than just S.M.A.R.T would be able to give you. For now, I'll be installing the Clam AV software, so we have an antivirus on here. While not super important, it's usually good practice to have some kind of antivirus running on all of your systems. So if we install it, wait for it to finish, we can then open it from the home page, for which if it overflows, you'll find a second tab at the very bottom, and inside of here, we can add a task, schedule a task to happen every day at, say, 4 a.m., and scan through a bunch of different files. I'll choose to scan all of my drives at 4 a.m. weekly, or daily even, and I'll only report issues in the Clam AV software or send them over email. You can choose to quarantine files and folders, or even delete them, but these measures are usually a lot, especially if you've got a local antivirus running on all of your systems anyways. For now though, this seems fine. I'll also head across to the Update tab, where in here we can update the virus definitions so we can catch more up-to-date things. Here we can also choose to update, which I would recommend choosing daily here, just to make sure that if something new pops up and it happens to be on your device, it might get caught by Clam AV or whatever AV you choose to install. If we check out the activity monitor, it's basically your task manager. Here we can see CPU usage, memory, network, drive usage, and things like that, and they should be color-coded for different workloads, etc. On the processes tab, you can see what process is using a lot of your system, although you can't kill or close them from here, which is a little odd. On the driver usage tab, we get a nice pie chart for what's being used by what, which is especially useful if you have snapshots enabled and for some reason you just have no drive space left. If snapshots are eating everything, it's obviously time to check out your storage manager and remove old snapshots. Then we've also got Easy Sync Manager, which is a great little app for syncing files and folders from your PC to your NAS, so you can have a quick little backup, though I'll be going way more into depth with backing up your system and rolling backups in a separate video you'll find linked down below when it comes out. You can also keep a copy on the cloud, the same way you do here, with either this app or a similar ASUSTOR app, but again, I'll get to that in the future. In the Backup Central app here, you can set up a remote sync to sync with other NASs, SMB targets, FTP targets, like a Hertzner storage box, backup to another drive internally, such as backing up a specific folder from one RAID volume to another, etc., external backup to a network location, and a one-touch backup, which is the USB combination button at the front of our NAS, which we can stick a device in, and upon pressing the button, which surrounds the USB port, allows us to copy data from the USB or to the USB based on a specific path, which is great. This works really well for importing footage from cameras and things like that. On the Services tab here, you can manage SMB, AFP, NFS, which is the Windows privileges. You can set up an FTP server if you wish to connect to this thing using FTP instead of SMB. You've got WebDAV, which is a similar storage technology, Terminal, which enables SSH, which if you choose to do so, it recommends you to change the port. Doesn't really matter too much. Again, a simple port scan gets you everything anyways, but you can also set up SSH keys, which is super important, and disable password authentication for everything, so your device is much more secure if you choose to have SSH enabled. You can always turn it on, do what you need, and turn it off, which is another option, but SSH keys are a great way of handling things. rsync server, we can set this NAS to be an rsync server, connect to it, and use rsync from different devices, which is great, TFTP, SNMP for network management, and SFTP, which is FTP over an SSH connection. Finally, reverse proxy, if you wish to use these as well, you can set them up here. Although I'll be using Portainer and Docker for everything that I'm going to be hosting on this. Anyways, you only really need to use that tab if you're installing apps like Plex and Jellyfin, and you're not managing more of it through something like Portainer. On the Web Center, which you can use to install and manage things like PHP, Nginx, and Apache, again if you're not going to be using Docker. External devices where you can manage hard drives, printer, Wi-Fi, UPSs, and things like that, which is all great, but you'll need to connect these devices using USB, add Wi-Fi, Bluetooth adapters, things like that. You can do all of that from this tab here based on whatever workload you're going to be running. System info tells you about your device. Network, you can check the log here, and you can see which users are currently logged in. So for now, I'll be opening up App Central, installing Docker, and once it's done, we can't actually use anything. You'll need another app to manage Docker, or you'll need SSH enabled, where we can run Docker commands directly. I'll be installing Portainer here, which is a relatively simple way for managing different Docker stacks, containers, etc. So searching for Portainer and installing it also shows us BitTorrent, OwnCloud, Nextcloud, things like that. There's a huge amount of stuff that you can do here, but for now, I'm just setting up Docker. After installing it and opening it up, we can now manage our device. So I'll set a username and password, then I'll choose Get Started to use the existing environment, and now we can manage Docker on the system. You can see I've got 4 CPUs here, which is the Intel Celeron, and 12 gigs of RAM, so everything's working fine. From the Stacks tab, I can set up a Docker Compose file. Containers, I can spin up individual containers like, say, the Hello World container, and once we do, check out the log, you can see that our Hello World container is running, which is great. From the Stacks tab, here you can set up things like your Plex stack, media server, etc. You can do whatever you want as it's a fully fledged Docker installation. And of course, you don't even need to come back to this NAS Management Center. You can just punch in the ports directly and interact straight with Portainer and things like that. This entire interface is just a simple way of interacting with your system. Finally, on the ADM Defender tab, here we can customize our firewall and things like that, which I would recommend. The first time you open it, it'll ask you to trust your specific device IP, which is great so that you don't get blocked if you try to log in too many times. Intelligent protection, you can enable a blacklist for IPs and things like that here, as well as a graylist tab where you can automatically block suspicious IPs by using the Abuse IPDB database with an API key you create there. On the Firewall tab, you can manage different ports that are accessible here, and I would definitely recommend enabling this even if you're not planning on doing anything with your device, just so you make sure it's a bit more locked down. You can then set up a firewall policy, such as Intranet only, where it allows all local network connections, location restricted, which only allows certain countries and areas to use your NAS, and finally customize, where you can do things a lot more controlled. For now, I'll choose Intranet only, which only allows local devices to connect to my NAS, which is great. If I choose to customize it, I can add rules here, such as allowing port 6060, which is access to this management from any device on my network, besides the whitelisted device, which we added on the trusted list, and we can allow port 80, 443, things like that for a website, etc., etc. And with that, we've pretty much covered everything you need to know about this thing. We've locked it down quite a bit. We've set up some basic file sharing, so we can connect different devices and use the same data on different computers, phones, etc. And now you know pretty much everything you need to know in order to get started. From here, it's smooth sailing. So hopefully you found this video useful. Again, you'll find linked down below a guide on setting up rolling backups in the future when I get to that, as well as my Linux channel linked down below where there'll be a bunch more content on this particular NAS. Again, a huge thank you to ASUSTOR for sending me this device. It'll definitely get tons of use, so it's super well appreciated. For now, it's just on me to sort out that failing drive, which isn't going to be the cheapest thing to do, as I want to set up a proper RAID array with 4 drives, etc. Hopefully you have better luck than I did. At least I found out my drive was failing when there was nothing on it, versus before when there was lots of recordings, etc. So that's at least something positive that came out of this in that regard. But anyways, again, a huge thank you to ASUSTOR. Thank you all for watching. Mine's been Troubleshoot, and I'll see you all next time. Ciao.